Today's lecture is on food and religion. In this lecture, we're going to be talking about some of the major religions around the world. There are 5 religions that are considered major world religions. We'll be focusing on those. Of course, there are a lot of others that we're not going to be focusing on quite as much. But when we talk about different parts of the world, we may delve into some of the belief systems that are alive in those parts of the world. But for our big 5, they all, whether they're Eastern religions or Western religions, have a few things in common. They all represent some system of faith and worship. So there are rituals and prayers and rules that are followed in each one of the different religions that represent how to correctly worship. For many people, religion helps explain the inexplicable things in their life. It offers a sense of comfort, offers belonging, and as I said, many of the rites and rituals that happen in different religions give people that membership and help them have a closer relationship with whoever their deity is, or simply what type of personal level that they're trying to achieve. And we'll talk more about that as we go on through our lecture today. In the United States, we are overwhelmingly Christian. You can see in this slide that Protestant Christian is overwhelmingly claimed by most people who are religious in America. Smaller percentage is Roman Catholic. Again, that is a Christian denomination. We'll talk more about that a bit later in the lecture. A small but growing number is Muslim. A very small percentage are Eastern Orthodox, which is also a Christian denomination. And a very small, at this point, but growing segment of people consider themselves to not be religious. And that's something that is an interesting trend, and it's something that we're seeing particularly among people who are younger, that they are not subscribing to religion nearly as much as their parents or the grandparents did. So that's not represented in this slide, but it's definitely something worth mentioning in the context of our lecture today. As I mentioned, we're going to be talking about both Eastern and Western religions in this lecture, the big 5. In the Western religions, these are, as you see here on the slide, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And here in the United States, we may not think of those as being Western. We tend to think of the United States as Western. But at this time, that was where these were happening, that was the West. And then the other religions were to the east. So Eastern religions include Buddhism and Hinduism. Those are the major 2. So as far as Western religions go, these religions all originated in the Middle East. They worshipped a single God, and that is in contrast to, when these religions were born, people would in these areas had worship of all sorts of different deities and mythologies and things, and for a lot of people it was just explaining things that they didn't understand, like the weather or natural disasters or things like that. And the idea of a single God took hold in all these different religions, all 3 of these different Western religions, and they went from there. The central idea of these Western religions, what they have in common, is that God commands and humans obey. And the central idea is that this life is a time of testing and preparation. So here on Earth, the thought of all these 3 of these religions that they have in common is that life on Earth is preparation for some sort of an afterlife with God. So all three of those religions believe in that. Eastern religions are a little bit different. Buddhism and Hinduism, both of them actually originated in India. We'll talk about them a little bit more in depth later in the lecture. But the central idea is that there's not really a central God. It's more of a deliverance, liberation of the human soul. So everything that you do in this life helps determine where your soul is going to go. You want to completely liberate your soul from your human body. So reincarnation is an idea that is brought up here that, if your soul isn't completely purified, then you need to come back and do it again. So ultimately the goal is deliverance, to be freed from the shackles of this human life. And so that's the main persistent idea that we have there, and we'll get into this again, as I said, as we go into the lecture. So of course in this class we are concerned primarily with food habits and foods in general. So of course the big focus of this lecture is going to be religion and food habits. Religious dietary practices vary enormously even among those of the same faith. And some of the reasons for that is, of course, anybody who is religious may be aware, and even if you're not religious, may be aware that different people interpret religious rules in different ways. Or they may choose not to obey particular rules if they have their own personal reasons for not wanting to do that. The other thing with religious food habits is that they can change over time. If you think about where, for instance, the Western religions were born in the Middle East, in and around that area, the foods that were available are foods that were used for ritual and to make foods that were associated with the religion. But as the world grew and people moved to other parts of the world, those same foods that are available in the Middle East may not have been available to people in another land. So what they would have had to do is to try to find different substitutes for foods that were traditionally Middle Eastern. And Judaism is a great example of that. Jews are all over the world. They don't really have a homeland. And so those traditional foods that came from the Middle East that were originally associated with Judaism had to be reinterpreted for other parts of the world. So Jews that live in Central or Eastern Europe, or the United States for that matter, are going to be eating something rather different than what their ancestors in the Middle East would have been eaten. So sometimes those food basics have kind of changed depending on where the populations have ended up, because you're going to be eating what is growing wherever you are. Now the food rules still apply. So in Judaism you need to eat kosher meat, and we'll talk about that momentarily. The meat that is traditional in the Middle East, say lamb for example, is going to maybe not be as available in another part of the world. So, as long as it's not pork, which Jews cannot eat, it's not considered kosher, they may rely on something else like fish or beef or things like that. So there are subtle differences, and that is true for anybody of any religion going to another country. They're going to try to find things that will fit within their particular dietary rules, if those apply. The most variable of cultural food habits are those related to religion. So many of the rules, there are some religions that have stricter dietary rules than others, but in many cases, you can sort of find a lot of variability based on the foods that are available wherever it is that you happen to settle. I'm going to start by talking about the major Western religions. We'll focus on Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. And what you see on the slide there is an aerial map of Jerusalem. And Jerusalem is in Israel, and you can see on the map there where exactly Jerusalem is. The reason I put this slide up is because Jerusalem is a city that is considered sacred to all three religions. There are sacred temples and monuments and places in this city that are absolutely sacred to all three of these religions. And you can see in the map here, you've got the Christian quarter, the Muslim quarter, and the Jewish quarter. There's also an Armenian quarter, but for a big three, this is what we're talking about. So they live in very close proximity to each other. And you may hear that Jerusalem, there's a lot of tensions that go on in this part of the world, and that they're so closely contained, sometimes that can lead to problems over time. But it's interesting that all three, the big Western three here, are all sort of shoehorned into this small area. We'll start by talking about Judaism. The picture you see here is the Western Wall. It's also referred to as the Wailing Wall. It's a sacred site for Jews, and it is a wall that is left over from a Jewish temple that was destroyed early in the millennium. And Jews go there and pray at the wall, and it's considered a sacred site. Judaism originated over 4,000 years ago, and they're considered what we call an ethno-religious group. So what we mean by that is that Judaism is a religion in and of itself, but there's also an ethnicity that's associated with Judaism. And that's because, as you see here, Jews tend to define themselves as much through their religion as their ancestry. So it's the same as saying if somebody says they're Israeli or I'm American, they may also identify themselves as I am Jewish. That's who I am. This is what I believe. This is how I dress. This is what I eat, and it's an integral part of my culture. Judaism also represents a nation as well as a religion. In 1948, the nation of Israel was established, and prior to that, 1,000 years prior to that, Jews didn't really have any sort of a home. They were always sort of wandering all over the place. In fact, the Wailing Wall that I showed you in the previous slide, the temple was destroyed in 70 AD, so early in the millennium. At that point, that marked a point where Jews that were in that region began to leave and began to go to other parts of the world. And that's referred to as the diaspora. You can see that word on the slide there. Diaspora means that people are just scattering all over the place. So Jews went everywhere. They went to Europe, they went to the Middle East, they went all over the place. And in 1948, when this nation of Israel was established, some moved back, but many stayed where they were. So Jews are really all over the place. So in terms of, as I referred to earlier in the lecture, in terms of what food is considered Jewish, it really kind of depends on what part of the world you're in and what group of Jews you're eating with, what you might eat. Jews are divided into two prominent sects. The first one is the Ashkenazi, and these are the ones that you find mostly in Europe. And then the Sephardic Jews are mostly in Southern European and Middle Eastern countries. There are other little groups, but as far as our prominent sects are, these are the two that we're talking about when we're talking about Jews. The holy book of the Jews is called the Torah. It consists of the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, and really what it is it's just a group of rules telling you how to be Jewish. These are the basic laws. This is what God wants us to do. So this is the way we should prepare food. So of course all the dietary laws are laid out in the Torah. How to act and how to behave, giving to charity, how to live, how to conduct yourself as a Jewish person. So those rules are all there outlined in the Torah. As in many religions, there are different interpretations within different religions as to how strict they're going to be and how they're going to worship and so on and so forth. In Judaism, there are generally 3 types of congregations. The first of which is called Orthodox. So this is the very strictest interpretation of God's law. There are no deviations allowed. If it is in the Torah and that's what it says, and that is what you do. You are not allowed to deviate from that. Reform Jews tend to believe that the Torah is valid, but they're still open to interpretation. So you can interpret the word from the Torah in different ways and make that, and it's still as correct as what is stated verbatim in the Torah. And then conservative generally falls somewhere between Orthodox and Reform ideas. Jewish dietary laws as spelled out in the Torah, the group of Jewish dietary laws are called the kashrut, as you can see there. The basic idea is that what you eat, you become. So it's sort of like the what you are, what you eat saying. Eating foods that have been deemed unclean will contaminate your body. So anything that you're eating, if it is unclean, you're going to become unclean, and that's not only unclean in body, but also unclean in spirit. So you may have heard the word kosher before. Sometimes the word kasher is used. Kosher just means fit. You are spiritually fit. And your body is fit because what you are eating is good. So if food is kosher, it means that it is fit to eat. It is okay to eat. Glatt kosher is sort of like the Orthodox. It meets the very strictest kosher standards for consumption. All Orthodox and some conservative Jews follow the dietary laws. As I said, there are always people in different religions who will sort of pick and choose what works for them, and then others are more inclined to go exactly with what the Torah says with no deviations. And that can be seen in other religions as well. So, per Jewish dietary laws, there are permitted animal foods and forbidden animal foods. Anything that doesn't fall into the animal food group is considered parev, as you see the word on the bottom, P-A-R-E-V-E. Those are safe foods, so there's no special laws that govern them. But in terms of animals, mammals that have a cloven foot, and again this goes back to the Torah, and chew their cud are okay to eat. So these include cattle, so beef, deer, goat meat, and sheep are all okay as long as they've been slaughtered according to the shechita process. You see that word right there, it's shechita. This is a process that is specialized in killing the animal, and any meat that is produced from the animal has to be free of blood. Blood is considered absolutely forbidden, and so kosher meats are salted. and salt draws the blood out. And so the koshering process, part of that is the salting. But the process also needs to be covered by or attended by a rabbi to make sure that the kosher process is carried out, carried out without any problems. So, so food that is animal food that is processed according to those laws is fine. Attended by a rabbi, that's fine. Fish is fine, and then of course at the bottom of the permitted animal foods you see the pareve foods that we were talking about. Eggs, which are an animal food but don't present any particular problems. Vegetables, fruits, grains, those are all considered to be okay. Forbidden animal foods include swine. So Jews do not eat pork. Jews who are observant won't eat pork because that's not considered kosher. Rabbits and any type of carnivorous animal, so any type of an animal that eats meat is also forbidden. Any products of any of the forbidden animals. As you see here, the one exception is honey, because honey is thought to contain no part of the unclean bee. So bees would be considered not kosher, but honey is okay. Blood, as we talked about, all kosher meat is exsanguinated. Exsanguinated is just a word that means it has no blood. The blood has been removed from it. You can't eat milk and meat products together. So you can't, for example, a cheeseburger would not be considered kosher, and that is because you can't combine the milk of an animal that would feed the young. So you're not going to eat the meat of something that relied on milk for a mother. So that is considered forbidden. And in fact, in kitchens where both meat and milk and dairy products are handled together, they actually have to be kept completely separate, to the point where even utensils that have been used to deal with dairy products must be completely cleaned, and they can't have any contact at all with meat. Some kitchens have completely separate sections for dealing with dairy products and dealing with meat products. So, even if they're kosher, they just absolutely cannot come in touch with each other. Any kind of fish without fins or scales, or shellfish, those are all considered to be unclean by Jews. And any kind of reptiles, amphibians, and vertebrates, so insects and turtles, those sorts of things, would be considered not to be kosher and not consumed by Jewish people who are observant of the dietary laws, the kashrut. This is just a slide that has several different kosher food labels on it. If you find foods that are kosher, somewhere on the packaging you're going to find one of these symbols that will indicate, for people who are interested in knowing if it's kosher, that this will be there and it is safe for them to eat. We're going to switch our attention to Islam, another of the big three Western religions. People who practice Islam are referred to as Muslims. This picture is showing Muslims on pilgrimage. Pilgrimage is called Hajj, H-A-J-J. It is one of the 5 pillars of Islam that we'll get into on how to be an observant Muslim, that you, at least once in your lifetime, should go to Mecca, Saudi Arabia, which is where this is located, and go on pilgrimage. And what the observant Muslims do is they go and they circle that black square that you see in the center there. That is referred to as the Kaaba. They are to walk around it 7 times, and so you can see the circles of people walking around it. And this is a very sacred thing for Muslims to do. The Kaaba itself is mentioned in the Quran, and it's regarded as the first house of worship. And it was in the Quran, it was built by Abraham, who was given a black stone by an angel, and it was built as part of this structure, the Kaaba. So that's the brief story behind it. Of course, there's a lot more detail in the Quran, but Muslims consider this absolutely sacred, and so Muslims are almost required to go there, but it's if they can afford it and if they have the means to do so, they are strongly encouraged to go on Hajj at least once in their lifetime. So as I said, people who practice Islam are called Muslims. Islam is not only a religion, but it's considered to be a way of life, much like we saw with the Jews. The holy book is called the Quran, and it is at this point the second largest religious group in the world. And you can see the map here. This is, as of the year 2000, what in Africa, Asia, Europe, and the Middle East, the U.S. isn't on here, obviously, or North America, South America, but you can see from this map the percentages of countries that are have a significant Islamic population. So the very dark brown, and you see all across the top of Africa, all throughout the Middle East, more than 86% of the people that live in these areas are Muslim, and then lesser in some of the other areas around the world. Islam is not as widely practiced in the United States. Christianity is by far the most common religion that you'll find here in the U.S., but we do have a pretty good population. About roughly 6 million people in the U.S. Consider themselves to be Muslim. Certainly we've had a lot of people who have migrated to the United States from other parts of the country, and earlier, particularly in the 60s, the Nation of Islam, or Black Muslims, was a movement that started with African Americans in this country to spread Islam about in the United States. The thing about Islam is there is no central religious figure. There's no version of the Pope or anything like that. Muslims see themselves as individually, directly responsible to God for their behaviors. So Muslims are charged to do certain things, and Muslims are charged with following the basic rules, or what are called the 5 pillars of Islam. So, as you see on the slide here, they must have faith, and they have to pray 5 times a day. And you may have heard of the call to prayer. Muslims will stop what they're doing, and they'll bow toward Mecca and say their prayers 5 times daily. Almsgiving is also part of the rules, and so alms are really aid to others, so it might be money or other things that are given. Fasting is important at certain parts of the year. We'll talk about Ramadan shortly. And then the pilgrimage to Mecca for Hajj during the lifetime, if they're able to do that. There are several sects in Islam. By far the largest is the Sunni sect, and that's one that we probably hear the most about in the world today when we're hearing different stories about Muslims, and we hear about the Sunnis, and we hear about the Shias, the Shiites. Shia is, that sect is located mainly in the Middle East, Iraq, Iran, Yemen, throughout India. Those tend to be more Shia. although there are definitely Sunnis in that area too. The Sunnis are, in fact, the largest sect, and most Muslims who live in the United States are Sunni. And then there are the two smaller sects that you see there that are in other parts of the world, and we don't hear as much about them. Again, most of the time you'll hear mostly about the Sunnis and the Shiites. So Islamic dietary laws are referred to as halal. Eating is considered to be part of worship. So in that context, things like overindulging are really frowned upon. You eat to keep your body alive and you eat to keep your body healthy, but taking extreme pleasure in food would be considered sinful. So any kind of self-indulgence is discouraged there. Followers are instructed to eat only until they reach about 2/3 of their capacity, so they've had enough to eat, but they haven't overindulged. Sharing food is encouraged, especially with the poor. And if not using utensils, you want to eat only with the right hand, which we've covered before. The left hand is considered to be unclean, so the right hand would be what you would use to eat. Halal foods are foods that are okay to eat. They're permitted, they're lawful. So anything that is not anything that is on the haram list, and you see on the other side of the slide, haram means prohibited. So haram is no, halal is yes. Anything that's not on the haram list is okay to eat. And we see a lot of similarities here to what we see Jewish people eating. Swine, any kind of pork is considered haram, absolutely forbidden. Improperly slaughtered animals and blood products. And so, again, the observant Muslim is not going to eat any kind of meat that hasn't been slaughtered in a particular way. And kosher meats actually fit the bill because they're not allowed to eat blood either. So for a Muslim person, it would be okay to eat kosher meat because it doesn't have any blood in it. And same thing for a Jewish person, they would be fine eating halal meats because it's been treated in the same way. Other things that are considered haram for a Muslim is any kind of alcoholic beverage, any kind of drugs that are going to be intoxicants, and drinking coffee and tea is generally discouraged. So there are things that are on haram that just to be aware of, but just keep in mind it's actually quite similar to what we see with Judaism in terms of the meat anyway. Ramadan is a special time of fasting. It occurs in the 9th month of the Islamic calendar, which is based on the lunar year. So the time of the year can vary with what we generally follow in terms of the calendar. Observant Muslims who are fasting during Ramadan, they have to abstain from any food or drink from dawn to sundown. So they're able to eat before the sun comes up. So generally a large meal will be eaten at breakfast. And they don't consume anything, not even water, during the time the sun is up. And when the sun goes down, they're able to eat again and drink again. The Ramadan daily fast is broken with water and an uneven number of dates. So dates are fruit. So before they eat that evening meal, they're going to drink water and have some dates, and that is breaking the fast for the evening time. Ramadan is also a time to take care of your friends and neighbors and the needy. So there's a lot of donation going on for others. There's a lot of consideration for others during this time. All Muslims over the age of 15 years must participate in Ramadan, although there are some exceptions made for people who are chronically ill and otherwise may be feeble for whatever reason. Christianity is the most common religion that is claimed by people in the United States who see themselves as religious.
Around the world, more people follow Christianity than any other single religion, and certainly here in the United States, it is dominant. The Holy Book of Christianity is the Bible, and there's several different versions of the Bible because there are several different sects of Christianity. The three major branches of Christianity include Roman Catholicism and Protestantism, which is most common in the United States right now. Protestantism is a reform of the Catholic Church, which had become corrupt early on during the Renaissance, and Protestantism was a breakaway from that to try to improve the church and make it better. And then there's Eastern Orthodox Christianity, which is not something that we see in the United States as much. We see Orthodox churches, for example, in Russia and in Greece's prominent Orthodox church, but they're all branches of Christianity.
This is a very complicated slide. I will leave it up for a moment so you can look at it. You see at the very top the early Christian church, the very roots of the church starting, and then everything that it branched off into. So you see the Roman Catholic Church, there's a branch of the Eastern Orthodox that branched off of the Roman Catholic Church. You see Greek and Russian Orthodox going from there. On the other side you see the Reformed Church. Those are the Protestant denominations, so you'll see several of them over there, Presbyterians, Mennonites, and so on. The Anglican Church of England, and then all sorts of branches off of that. So Christianity, unlike Judaism and Islam, doesn't really have the sects, so to speak, that we saw with those two, but just a lot of different denominations. So they all worship one God, but they do it in very different ways. Roman Catholicism, this is a map that indicates the percentage of the population that considers themselves to be Roman Catholic. We see very heavy concentration in South America, Mexico, different countries in Europe. The Philippines is very Catholic, and then many other areas that are very low in Catholicism, Northern Africa, Asia, Russia, Middle East. Some Catholics there, not too many. Roman Catholicism has a few feast days. Christmas and Easter are perhaps the best known. Holiday fare depends on the country of origin. Much like we talked about with the Jews, Catholics are everywhere around the world, and so types of foods that they would eat really sort of depend on where they are in the world. Traditional meals and dishes common for the holidays: egg, fish, breads. Those are very common. Fish, of course, is very important on Fridays of Lent, where meat is not able to be eaten. Lent itself is a time for Catholics to engage in self-examination on their relationship with God and sort of where they are and how they can be better Catholics. And it's a period of time where fasting takes place, where every Friday is considered to be a sacrifice as far as not eating meat that day. Fish is okay, and of course vegetarian dishes are okay. Traditionally, Catholics never ate meat on Fridays. It was considered a day where that would be forbidden, although those laws have been sort of relaxed more recently. Mardi Gras is a common celebration you see celebrated in many parts of the world: South America, Rio, Mexico, you hear a lot about that. New Orleans, Mardi Gras is a big deal. And Mardi Gras is translates from French into Fat Tuesday, which means, essentially what it means is it's a big party before everybody has to go into Lent and become contemplative and give up and sacrifice. So Mardi Gras is sort of the party before you have to kind of quiet down and tune more into your religious life. Fasting days, Ash Wednesday and Good Friday. The rules for fasting in Roman Catholicism are not the same as we would see in Ramadan. Fasting means that you don't eat. You can eat one full meal during that day, and you can eat two other meals as long as the two together don't constitute the same amount of food that would be in one meal. So really you're just eating one full meal and maybe two very small snacks, and that's considered fasting in Roman Catholicism. Everybody over age 14 needs to refrain from eating meat on those days that are described as penitential. All the Fridays of Lent, as I was saying, Ash Wednesday and Good Friday. And they also observe a fast 1 hour prior to receiving Holy Communion, which is which is the body of Christ as far as Roman Catholics are concerned, to really sort of have a clean, pure system to receive that communion. The Eastern Orthodox Church has at least 11 feast days during their year, which include Christmas and Easter. Fasting days, they have several, including Lent, many during the Lent period. They do observe a fast prior to receiving Holy Communion, and traditional fare varies because, we see the Orthodox Church in several areas, but so it depends on where people in that church are living, residing, and what grows there. But typical fare, we will see eggs, fish, bread, olives. Those are really common for feasting days in the Eastern Orthodox Church. There are a couple other Christian religions with notable dietary practices. In particular, the Mormons and the Seventh-day Adventists are worth mentioning. Mormons are considered to be the Church of Latter-day Saints. It's an American religion, started here in the 1800s. The state of Utah, about 80% of the people that live in that state are consider themselves to be Mormon. And they have some specific rules as far as not consuming anything that is going to alter your body in any way. So tobacco, alcohol, caffeine, those things are considered to be forbidden. And the other interesting thing about Mormons is that there is a big focus on preparing for disasters and emergencies. And Mormons are encouraged to have large amounts of food and water in reserve for emergencies or for disasters and things like that. So you'll find many Mormons will do that. Seventh-day Adventists, there's about 500,000 in the United States, about 1 million worldwide, so it's a fairly small religion. Also a religion that was started in the United States in the 1860s. The Sabbath, the holy day, is observed from sundown on Friday to sundown on Saturday, so Saturdays are considered holy. They believe that sickness results from violating the laws of health, and so people who practice Seventh-day Adventist religion and are very strict about it tend to be actually very healthy people, because vegetarianism and lacto-ovo-vegetarianism, which means they eat eggs and dairy products, is widely practiced. And they also forbid coffee, tea, alcohol, and tobacco. But they eschew meat, so they won't eat any meat at all, the observant ones. So there's actually a lot of health studies that look at Seventh-day Adventists, because in many ways they really eat what research anyway indicates is a perfect diet, is a very, very good, healthy diet. And so these people are generally in pretty good shape. So the medical industry and research takes particular note of these folks, and just to see how the body reacts to really good diet. We're going to switch gears and talk about Eastern religions, in particular Hinduism and Buddhism. We'll start with Hinduism. Hinduism is the world's oldest religion. It has been around for a really long time, and in fact, the origins are kind of not clear as far as how old it is. These days, the vast majority of those who practice Hinduism live in India, and you can see again on this map the world's largest populations are in India, Nepal, Bangladesh, Indonesia, Sri Lanka. The United States is number 8 on that list. There are a lot of, so many Hindus that live here as well. According to this map, at this time it was over 1 million people. Their belief is in an eventual transformation of human into divine consciousness, which may take several lifetimes, and they have a belief in reincarnation. Remember, we were talking about earlier how the focus in this religion was to release the soul from the, I guess you could refer to it almost as a fleshly prison. To release the soul from the body to live in divine consciousness. And so people who adhere to Hinduism are trying to get it right every time they are here in a new body to get it right. And they see if you don't do it right, or you're not a good person and you don't do well, then you are doomed to come back in yet another body. So the principles of Hinduism to help get people to that divine point are in purity, self-control, detachment, truth, and non-violence. So really you're trying to see how well you can do those things in your time on earth in hopes of not coming back. As far as dietary practices go, the general rule is to avoid any foods believed to keep one from reaching mental purity and being able to enjoy communion in the afterlife. Cows are sacred. They are taboo. You cannot eat a cow. If you're Hindu, you can't eat beef. That is absolutely considered taboo. The laws of Manu dictate that no sin is attached to eating flesh, drinking wine, or gratifying sexual urges, for these are natural propensities of men, but abstinence from these bears greater fruit. So in this, it indicates that it is okay to do whatever you want. However, if you can control yourself and not gratify those urges, but practice that self-control, you're going to be better. You're going to be more pure. So that's the challenge, really. Many Hindus adhere to the concept of something called ahimsa, which is avoiding inflicting pain by not eating animals. So many Hindus, a majority of Hindus, are lacto-ovo vegetarians. And again, lacto-ovo refers to the fact that they will eat eggs and dairy products, but not meat, the flesh of animals. Hindu food rules employ a complex set of rules designed to achieve purity and avoid pollution of the mind and spirit. And so that is the challenge for Hindus, to make themselves absolutely pure, so that their goal is to not come back in an afterlife, to reach that divine consciousness and liberation from the body. Buddhism is a later branch off of Hinduism. It was founded in India in the 6th century BC by the Buddha. It was a Protestant revolt against Orthodox Hinduism, so looking to make some changes in Hinduism really developed this new religion of Buddhism. Buddhism and Hinduism share many concepts. They believe in reincarnation and karma, and the goal is the spiritual liberation from the flesh. So very similar. They practice the middle way, which is somewhere between asceticism, which is absolute deprivation, and self-indulgence. So the middle way is somewhere between the two of them, while keeping the mind and spirit and body pure. Noble truths, the teaching of Buddha, involve suffering, the causes of suffering, cessation of suffering, and the path. Dietary practices vary widely depending on the sect of Buddhism and the location. Buddhism is another religion that's practiced in several different areas, so what they eat is really dictated by where they are. The Eightfold Path that I was referring to is the way to get to enlightenment, and enlightenment is that spiritual freedom. It prohibits the taking of life. So very much like Hinduism, many Buddhists are vegetarian because the suffering of animals would require taking of life. So that would not be considered to be okay. So most are lacto-ovo-vegetarians, although some will eat animals as long as they were killed by others. So they didn't have to do it themselves. Strict Buddhist monks follow very strict dietary guidelines, which are unlikely to be followed by Buddhists in the U.S. So probably more on the side of the ascetic practice than the more liberated one.